Hello.
Hello.
I am the youngest of 4 children who were all born within 3 years. No twins. This is back in the end of the 40s and the early 50s, and my mother said if the pill had been invented back then, none of you would be here. But growing up with brothers and a sister that close, we got along, and my closest one was the next brother. He was 11 months older than me. When in the 70s he moved to Florida, it was the 70s? No, actually it was the late 80s. He moved to Florida, and I vowed to go visit him every 2 months. One of these visits, when I got there, he had a horrendous sore on his arm. It was infected, it was oozing, it was in need of medical care. And I said, Rich, we got to get you to the hospital. What happened? And he said, my reading light fell on my arm while I was asleep. And I didn't know it until I smelled the flesh burning. And I said, well, let me take you back. My brother was quadriplegic. He had been paralyzed in an accident in the early 70s. And despite that, he had become independent and had moved on his own to Florida and was living alone in an apartment. And hence my going to see him every 2 months to make sure he was okay. So I said to him, we got to get you to the hospital. And he said, you know I'm not going to do that. I'm not going. And the reason was, after his diving accident in the 70s, he was a veteran. He was a Vietnam War era. He was put in a VA hospital. His accident wasn't caused by the Vietnam War, but it was right after he got home, and he went to the Veterans Hospital and was in the Veterans Hospital for about 8 months in rehab, trying to learn how to be a quadriplegic. And he said, I'm never going back. I'm not going. So I said, well, you got to get help, and this isn't going to work. And I could tell he had a fever. He was pretty sick. So I said, what do you think we ought to do? He said, well, how about if you drive me to some doctor's offices and we get a doctor to come out and look at my wound, and maybe they'll help me. Now, his fear was that they're going to put him in a nursing home. He's a single man who's a quadriplegic taking care of himself, and obviously somebody sees this, they're going to say, you can't take care of yourself. So he was not going to put up with that. But he was willing to go to a doctor's office if the doctor would come out and look at him in the van that I had brought with me. So I said, okay. And I had learned over the almost 20 years that he had been a quadriplegic that I needed to follow his lead. He needed to have some control over his life. So I said, okay, Rich, let's go. Got the phone book out, Yellow Pages out. We're in Winter Garden, Florida. Winter Garden, Florida at that time in the late 80s was not what it is now. But we were able to drive around without GPS, and we had a map and we had a phone book, and we went to doctor's offices. And I would go in and I would ask the receptionist if I could get a doctor to come out and look at my brother who's sitting in a van. And usually, no, not usually, I never got to see a doctor. The receptionist never let me through to the doctor. There might be a nurse that came out and said, sorry, he's got to come inside. He's got to come inside. And he wasn't going to do that. So we would go to the next one. We'd go to the next one. We'd go to the next one. We were at this for hours, and I said, Rich, it's not working. He said, pharmacy, let's go to a pharmacy. Maybe we can get a pharmacist to come out and give me an antibiotic. I said, okay, you're calling the shots. Go to pharmacy after pharmacy. Nobody's going to come out and see this man. And in the meantime, how many here have been in a competition like a running race or that kind of thing? You know when you get nervous, your stomach starts churning, and that's why all the Port Johns are all lined up before the race, you know? Well, that's what was happening to Rich's stomach. I could hear it churning in the back of this van. So I said, you know, let me try the emergency room. Maybe we can get an emergency room doctor to come out here and look at you. We go to the emergency room, the Winter Garden Hospital, and I go in and I talk to a receptionist. And there's a man standing behind her. And I start telling the story, and I say, my brother will not come in here. He's very sick. He will not come in here. And the man comes out from behind, and he comes up to me, and he says, I'm Dr. Van Eden, and I've been hearing your story. I want to come out and see your brother. So he came out, and I pulled open the van, and by then, Richard's stomach, the anxiety had taken a toll on him. And that man got in that van, walked right into the van, squatted down so that he was eye to eye with my brother. And he said, he had an accident. He said, hey, mate, you got a problem here, right? And he never let on that van was anything but daisy fresh. And believe me, it wasn't. And he said, I'm going to help you, and I'm not going to make you stay here, but I have to get you inside here. I've got to debride this. I've got to give you an antibiotic drip. It looks really serious. I'm going to give you some pills, and I'm going to let you go. And that's what he did. We went home that night, and Rich was on his way to getting better again. 2 months later, I'm back in Winter Garden, Florida, and Rich pushes the newspaper over. He's sitting at the table. He pushes the newspaper over, and the headline of the newspaper is Winter Garden, they didn't call him a doctor, they said Winter Garden Hospital employee arrested on identity charges. He wasn't a doctor. He was from South Africa, and he had come here, and he had made up his credentials to get a job in that hospital. And I read the article, and I looked at Rich, and we both started laughing. And it's just such a telling story about what medicine is, and of all the people that we had tried to see all day, nobody would help this man except the one who wasn't a doctor.